People ask, what is the best evidence for a young Earth? Well, the best evidence is the Bible.
The best evidence for young Earth is the Bible. Really, Dr. Lisle, you can't do any better than this. I mean, I think my job is done. Roll credits. Look, if the only thing you're going to say is my holy book says it, then you have no evidence at all. The Bible is not going to cut mustard here, dude. So let's see what else you have. Hi everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Jen's Little Corner.
After all, science is not really equipped to be able to definitively answer questions about the past.
Oh, come on, dude. No science? What about geology? Paleontology? How about dendrochronology, where we measure ages by tree rings? Or what about the science of ice cores? How about genetics? Or even better, what about astronomy? Your subject. You know all about astronomy.
And that's because science involves testing and repeating things in the present. But you can't test and repeat the past because it's gone.
Oh my non-existent Sky Daddy, you are so wrong, dude. Look, we can look at things, evidence of things in the past, and use our knowledge of how things change now to decide how these things happened in the past. That is science. It's experimentation on a world scale, where we look at the ways things happen in different locations around the world and how things are happening now, and we compare them. Comparative evidence. As we go into the past and, well, look at things that happened in the past. But even more importantly about looking at things in the past, let's go back to your chosen field, astronomy. We can look out to stars in the past because light takes a time to get to Earth from those stars. Light has a finite speed limit, 300,000 kilometers per second. That is it. Light moves no faster than that in a vacuum. So it takes time. A light year is a measure of how far light can travel in a year in a vacuum. So if a star is 5,000 light years away, it's taken 5,000 years for that light to get to us. And the light we are looking at happened in the past. Now, those stars out to 5,000 light years, we can actually figure out that they were 5,000 light years away using parallax measurements. To measure the parallax of a star, we take a plate image of where, well, computer images nowadays, a computer image of where that star appears in the night sky when the Earth is on one side of the sun, and then 6 months later when the Earth's over the other side of the sun, and a lot further away in space, we take another picture of it. Then using simple trigonometry, so the triangles, we can measure the distance to that star. Now this will only work out to a certain distance because stars beyond about 5,000 light years don't have enough parallax in them for us to actually be able to measure it with our current telescopes. But we can measure that distance, and we can measure that distance out to 5,000 light years in any direction where we can see a star out to about that distance. But here's the thing. We know there are stars more than 5,000 light years because there are stars we cannot measure the parallax of. So we know there are stars that are further. We also know that there are other galaxies. And these galaxies have to be outside of our own galaxy, which has to be at least a minimum of 10,000 light years across. But we know it's more than that because there's stars that we cannot measure the distance to with parallax. Now, I haven't even got into other ways of measuring distances to stars. This is just with simple trigonometry. So we already know that for the light to get to us from the stars that we can't measure the distance to with trigonometry, the universe has to be older than 5,000 years. And we are looking in the past when we do this. So we know that the universe isn't young. But as I said, we have other ways of measuring the distances to stars. We have what we call standard candles. And that works because if you have two light sources that are the same actual brightness, but at different distances to each other, the further away one is going to appear dimmer by a given ratio, because we know those two lights are the same brightness. Now, the interesting thing about this is, certain types of supernovas, type 1a supernovas to be exact, always explode with exactly the same brightness because of the way the supernova is formed. And we know this, and we can measure this. And when these supernovas happen, we can use them as standard candles to figure out how far away things are. And because of that, we can measure very vast distances in the universe. There are other ways we have of measuring these vast distances, but we now know that the universe is 96 billion light years across, our visible universe. The actual universe is probably infinitely larger, but our visible universe is 96 billion light years across. And it's got that far because of the vast expansion of the universe, which has made that light be further away from us. So it has taken that light from the farthest reaches 13 billion years to get to us. Our universe is not young, chum. Our universe is fucking old. And it's going to get much, much, much older. You dude are genuinely dishonest, because you are a PhD physicist, and astronomer, so you fucking know better than this. But let's get back to the video and see what other absolute drivel he can pull out of his butt.
To understand when something happened, you really need a history book. You need documentation, especially written by people who were there at the time. Those are the best history books. And that's exactly what we have in the Bible. We have the birth certificate of the earth, and of the universe for that matter.
Oh God. The Bible is a history book. This is a good one. I'd really like you to show me some evidence of this. The Bible, we're not even sure who authored most of the books. Especially in the Old Testament. I know you like to think they've been attributed to Moses, but that's just not so. There are at least thought of to be 5 authors for the early books of the Old Testament, including Genesis. So, your concept that this is a history book of people who were there, I mean, for one thing, the only people who were there, if your Genesis is true, were Adam and Eve. And they weren't even there for God to create it, because they weren't created till several days in. So, the only person there to witness your God creating the universe is your God, who we're not even sure exists, because we have no good evidence for it, apart from your holy book. See the problem here, dude? You have no corroborating evidence for the Bible at all. There are plenty of other holy books around the world which have their own creation stories, and from a historical point of view are just as valid as your Bible. which is not particularly valid at all. The Bible is not a history book. Get over it.
The Bible teaches that God created in 6 days, and it's clear from those genealogies and so begets so-and-so that was a few thousand years ago.
6 days. That's a rush job if ever I heard of one. But mind you, if you take a good look at our very inhospitable universe for life, considering 99.999% of the universe is out to kill us, yeah, that's a very good possibility that the universe was created in 6 days, because that would certainly explain an awful lot of the shit. There wasn't a lot of planning that went into this universe, and certainly not a lot of work. If there was a creator. Because if we had an actual creator, I would expect the universe to be a lot better managed than what it fucking is. So, your concept of the Earth being, and the whole universe being created in 6 days is just absolute nonsense. We know it didn't. We see stars being created in the universe now. We see the nurseries for stars. We see how long it takes for these things to happen. There's no reason to think that everything was created and then these things are going to create themselves. No. No, the universe evolved over time, and this is not the evolution of animals changing into other species. This is stellar evolution, which is not the same thing as evolution of species. Right? Do not do a fucking Ken Hovind on me. Stay away from that shit. What we are talking about here is the way that stars form from collapsed clouds. Why am I telling you this? You're a fucking astronomer. Get your act into gear. Dude, get your act into frickin' gear.
Now that being said, there's certainly a lot of science that confirms what the Bible teaches.
This ought to be good.
For example, carbon dating. Now for some reason, a lot of people have the misconception that carbon dating is what scientists use that gives the alleged billions of years. It's not. Carbon dating is one of the more reliable methods. There are other methods that they try to use to get the millions of years, but those also give millions of years on things that we know are young.
So you like carbon dating, but the other ones are wrong and inaccurate. News for you, dude. The technique used for dating with carbon is the same as that used for, say, potassium argon. You see, what we do is we have half-lives of these atoms, and that's how long it takes for half of that particular isotope to decay. Now, something like potassium argon, where the half-life is 1.3 billion years, is a bloody long time, whereas carbon's closer to 5,000 years for its half-life. The reason we date using different things is because of these differences in the times of their half-lives. You can't date things longer than a certain amount of time with carbon because all the carbon will have decayed. And you can't date things younger than a certain amount of time with something like potassium argon because not enough of it has decayed. There is overlap between some of these different dating methods, and that's how we can check the veracity of them, how accurate they are. But the concept of using something like carbon dating to date things that are very old is just nonsensical. You will get a false reading, or no reading, or whatever. And if you try to date something very young with something like potassium argon, you're going to get a nonsensical reading because it isn't old enough. You have to use the right type of dating for the thing that you're trying to date. And here's another little thing for you. You can only date things with carbon-14 that have been organic or contain organic molecules. If it's just a rock, you can't date it with carbon because it's going to have no carbon-14 in it. Funny that, but you're a physicist and an astronomer, so you actually know this. You are being dishonest to your audience just to try to convince them that carbon dating is the only one that's any good and the other ones are all crap. You are a disingenuous cockwomble.
And so they're not very reliable. Carbon dating is our friend. And in fact, we've even carbon dated things that evolutionists think to be hundreds of millions of years old, like coal beds. You can take a chunk of coal and carbon date it. You get thousands of years every time. Every time.
Yep, already told you why you can't do this. A lump of coal, while it may have been derived from organic matter originally, is now too old to actually have any carbon-14 left in it. There have been way too many years for you to get a measurement of carbon-14 from a lump of coal, you disingenuous prick.
We've even taken diamonds that evolutionists believe to be 1 to 2 billion years old based on these other radiometric dating methods. You carbon date them, you find they're a few thousand years old.
Same again, you disingenuous prick. You can't date things like coal and diamonds with carbon dating. These things are far too old, and there will be no carbon-14 left in these things. This is why we have other dating methods. And you know this.
And you see, the reason that works is because carbon dating is based on the decay of a particular form of carbon called C14, which has 2 extra neutrons. C14 is unstable and it decays with a half-life of 5,700 years, which means that carbon, C14, cannot last even 1 million years. In fact, if the entire Earth were nothing but C14, after 1 million years you would not have a single atom left. That's how fast it decays. And yet we find it in everything. Everything that has carbon in it has C14 in it.
Yes, everything that was alive once on our planet and isn't over a certain age since it died has C14 in it. There's this beautiful thing on our planet called the carbon cycle. Plants suck in CO2 from the atmosphere and use the carbon from that through photosynthesis to grow. Then animals eat the plants, we absorb the CO2, well, the carbon, not the CO2, we absorb the carbon from the plants to help us grow. Plants, animals die, go back to the soil, get leached out into things, and carbon ends up back in the atmosphere again. Brilliant thing, the carbon cycle. It's the circle of life. An absolutely brilliant thing. But there's another thing that happens up in our upper atmosphere. Cosmic rays enter the atmosphere, causing molecules up there to fly apart. The resulting neutrons collide into N14 atoms, and the N14 atoms convert into C14 atoms, thanks to the wonders of chemistry, which I know isn't your subject, but hey, I'm pretty sure you know this happens. So the reason why living things have carbon-14 in them is because of the carbon cycle. Because the C14 is constantly being renewed within our atmosphere, because our atmosphere contains a shitload of nitrogen. And trees pull it out of the atmosphere, animals eat, well, trees and other plants, and animals eat those plants, and we all absorb the beautiful C14. And then something dies, and that C14 starts to decay. So we can date something that has been living by the rate of the C14 decay within its body. Of course, whilst the thing's alive, you can't use C14 dating to date something because you're constantly renewing that supply of C14 in a living organism. Now, things that weren't living won't have any C14 in them. And things that are been dead for longer than about 35,000 years also will not have any C14 in them, or not enough for you to do a proper dating. It's all pretty simple actually, and you should know this.
We've even dated dinosaur fossils. They have C14 in them. They can't be millions of years old.
Now, the only reference I can find to any studies that have shown C14 in dinosaur bones were ones carried out by the Creation Research Science Education Foundation. One Hugh Miller was apparently the lead on that. His group disingenuously represented themselves to a museum as a group of chemists who wanted some fragments of dinosaur bone to do some studies on. They didn't tell the museum what they wanted them for. And when the museum provided these fragments, the museum told them that these fragments had been heavily contaminated with a shellac, an organic compound, and other chemical preservatives. Miller's groups just took the samples, tested them, and of course got erroneous results because the samples were contaminated. Can't be much more disingenuous than that, but that seems to be the usual way for these creation scientists.
There's a lot of stuff like that. Human population. How long does it take to get Earth's current population from just 2 people? It doesn't take millions of years. It's consistent with the biblical time scale.
Yep, already debunked by lots and lots of people. But I'm going to do the basics of this one for you. The Earth's rate of population growth has not been consistent. There have been points in history where the population of the world has gone backwards. For example, with wars and diseases like the Black Death. Our rate of growth of population is not been X number every so many years. It's been inconsistent, and it's been exponentially growing recently, but in the past was a lot slower and a lot more level. So you can't just extrapolate out how long it's taken to fill the world up, because this doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. But there's another problem with this. If you start out, because you guys have to start out from Noah, with just Noah's little family, and want to grow the world's population from there up to now, then you're only going to have a few thousand people by the time the Egyptians built the pyramids. And we already know there were millions of people on the earth by then. So I think your calculations are a little wrong here.
The rate at which Earth's magnetic field is decaying. We've been able to measure that for the past almost 2 centuries. It appears to be an exponential decay, which means you run the movie backwards and you'd find it was enormous in the past. You run it back 60,000 years, the Earth's magnetic field would be stronger than that of a neutron star, which would rip your atoms apart. So it can't be anywhere near that old.
Now, the origin of this comes from one Thomas G. Barnes. It was published in a paper in 1973. Barnes came up with his hypothesis here based on measurements of the Earth's magnetic field from about the 1835s to around the time he published the document. The problem with his study was it made a lot of assumptions that we now know are wrong. For one thing, he didn't allow for errors in the original measurements, and the fact that we got better at measuring the Earth's magnetic field from the time when the original readings were done to when he published his paper. So the accuracy of our measurements were actually better. He also didn't allow for the fact that the Earth's magnetic field does vary over time. It can get weaker over certain points of time and stronger at others, but these happen over thousands of years, and he's measuring just this one little tiny 100-year plus period of time. So his paper doesn't stand up to modern scientific investigation.
There's a lot of evidence like that the Earth is young, but the best is it's what the Bible teaches.
So that was your best, was it? Wasn't very good. See, if you're going to be totally disingenuous about science that you know doesn't show the things that you're saying it does, then you're just a fucking asshole. Like so many of you other dudes in AIG and creation science ministries, you're disingenuous And you really, really should give up. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already. And please, don't choke on the selfie stick.